this is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today we're going to do a bit more reading about pirates from this lovely vintage book. It's a Time Life book from a series called The Seafarers. Now, This time, their entreaties had the desired effect on the Royal Navy. The Admiralty put Commander Thomas Matthews in command of a squadron of 4 men of war and dispatched him around Africa to the Indian Ocean. Arriving at Madagascar ahead of the other ships in his squadron and not wishing to dally, Matthews left a letter instructing his captains and sallied forth on patrol. The pirates intercepted this letter, and as so often in the past, most of them declined to confront the Royal Navy. Though Matthews never fought or captured any pirates in the Indian Ocean, his mere presence there was enough to convince them that the game was not worth the candle. They drifted away, some into retirement, a number around the Cape of Good Hope to the west coast of Africa, where for a time they continued their activities, and this was where Captain Bartholomew Roberts came on the scene. This greatest of the pirate captains was born around 1682, and probably, like virtually all his fellows, saw active service on board a naval ship or privateer during the prolonged War of the Spanish Succession. It is known that at the time of Blackbeard's exploits, he was the mate of a Barbados trading sloop. By his mid-30s, he was clearly an outstanding master mariner. In the pirates' parlance of the time, he was pistol-proof, meaning a man expert in ship handling, crew control, and the tactics of naval warfare. Roberts' very expertise was in all probability an important reason for him turning pirate after 20 years as an honest seaman. As a ship's officer of working-class origins, he could not have expected a command of his own in legitimate service at sea. Only as a pirate could he attain the supreme rank to which his training, experience and ability fitted him. Nevertheless, he was averse at first to taking up pirate life on Davis's ship. But then events led him to change his stance. 6 weeks after the engagement at Anamaboa, Davis was slain, pistols blazing, in a Portuguese ambush on Prince's Island, where he had put into reprovision. The pirates retreated out to sea in the Royal Rover to nurse their wounds, and there on the rolling ocean the crew elected Roberts captain. Clearly he had already proved himself to be their superior. Roberts accepted the position. If he was reluctant to become an ordinary pirate crewman, he apparently found that he could reconcile himself to piracy when he was chosen as captain. It is better to be a commander than a common man, since I have dipped my hands in muddy water and must be a pirate, was how Roberts himself put it. What sort of man was this towering captain of pirate history? Defoe calls him black, implying that he was a swarthy, Celtic kind of Welshman. Though he was probably short in stature, like most Welsh hill people, he was blessed with a powerful personality and a natural flair for leadership, and he brought to his new rank as captain, or acquired, as a result of it, some of the mannerisms and affectations of the gentlemen officers of the regular Navy quarter-decks. His style of dress served to emphasise his distinction from his men. Rich crimson damask waistcoat, and breeches, red feather in his tricorn hat, gold chain around his neck, with a diamond cross disturbances, he put on a rougher deportment and a more magisterial carriage towards them. He made every member of the crew swear to obey his articles, and was swift to enforce these rules. And if any seemed to resent his usage, wrote Defoe, he told them they might go ashore and take satisfaction of him, if they thought fit, at sword and pistol, for he neither valued or feared any of them. So let's have a little look at these pictures. So at the bottom here, this long illustration is African canoes paddle out to European vessels anchored beyond the bar on the Gold Coast, where bartering took place. One early English traveller found the Africans reluctant to come aboard until the captain splashed 3 drops of seawater in his eye as a sign of friendship. That's a strange thing to do, isn't it? Because you'd think that would hurt. I suppose that was the point, maybe. And then this little picture up here. This is flying the cross of St. George, symbol of British rule. Fort Charles looks out on the Guinea Gulf at Anamaboa, an important gold and slave trading station. Such forts generally mounted 25 to 30 guns and were virtually impregnable against local uprisings or pirates. On one occasion, during a cruise, a drunken crewman insulted the captain to his face. Robert, beside himself with fury, killed the man on the spot, an act that was resented by many of the drunks, equally besotted shipmates, most notably one Thomas Jones. Jones was on shore at the time of the killing, but when he came back on board, he was told what had happened. He cursed Roberts and said he ought to be done away with himself. At this, the enraged captain drew his sword and stabbed Jones in the body, whereupon Jones, sorely wounded though he was, picked Roberts up, threw him over a cannon and beat him up. Handsomely, says Defoe. This riotous incident, not surprisingly, threw the whole ship into an uproar. Some of the crew sided with Roberts, others with Jones. It took the full authority of the quartermaster, who was responsible, after Roberts, for the ship's discipline to calm the tumult. In the inquiry that followed, the majority of the crew gave their view that the dignity of the captain ought to be upheld on board, and since it was a post of honour, no crew member was entitled to violate it. So poor Jones was sentenced to be severely punished. As soon as his stab wound had healed, he was tied up and given 2 lashes by every member of the crew. And the crew numbered 180 men. This terrible punishment did not, however, convince Jones that he was in the wrong, and at the earliest suitable moment, he and some cronies left Roberts to go off on their own account. The Royal Rovers crew could not have imagined the full depth of Roberts' personality or the adventures in store for them when they first set sail with a new captain in July of 1719. But Roberts, or Black Bart, as he has come to be known, lost no time in making his name as a pirate captain. In a whirlwind act of revenge, he returned to Princess Island and devastated the Portuguese settlement where Davis had been ambushed and slain. The account squared, Roberts set out south largest, most heavily laden ship and plundered her of her cargo, including 40,000 gold moidores, worth £50,000 in English currency. The other merchantmen could only cluck and cackle in dismay, firing their cannon and raising their top-gallant sails as distress signals to the convoy's 2 men-of-war escorts. But the warship's commanders either could not or would not make sail quickly enough to intercept Roberts. They remained at anchor until the pirate had sailed away with his prize. From Brazil, the pirates headed north. On Devil's Island, a sleazy Spanish colony off Guinea, later notorious as a French penal colony, they traded their loot for money and women and spent several weeks roistering and gambling steadier pirates seemed to have reached this goal already. They left the crew to retire a short time thereafter. But they were the rare ones. The majority heartily agreed with the one who made it plain to the Samuel's captain, "If we are captured, we will set fire to the powder with a pistol, and all go merrily to hell together." By September 1720, Roberts was back in the Caribbean, exchange this merchandise for gold, for only in this concentrated, indestructible form could his crew realise the real wealth of their piracy. But the American ports were too dangerous for Roberts, and he knew that eventually, despite all the shilly-shallying, a powerful expedition would be sent against him. He held a conference with his crew, and they voted to attempt another passage back to Africa, where they could dispose of their loot. Right, let's have a look at this illustration at the top. So this says, a fisherman dry codfish on Newfoundland, a fertile northern port of call for pirates. In this 1715 engraving, the brigands found easy pickings among the cargo-laden merchant ships that put in for reprovisioning before setting out on the long journey across the Atlantic. They also found eager recruits among the local fishermen who were tired of their hard life. At the beginning of April, Roberts and his crew set out on their eastward voyage. This time, Roberts found favourable winds, and the Royal Fortune made its landfall at Senegal. From Senegal, Roberts sailed to Sierra Leone. For 6 weeks, while they careened and refitted their ships, the pirates enjoyed the hospitality of the freelance English traders of Sierra Leone. Though the Royal Africa Company had an official monopoly on all English trade along the coast, about 30 of these illicit entrepreneurs had set up their own posts on the coast and up the major rivers. These merchants of fortune proved good friends of the pirates, much as the Madagascar traders had sustained the pirates of a generation before. The most prosperous among them was ex-buccaneer John Ledstone, called Old Crackers, who kept the most hospitable house on the coast, and had several guns mounted by his door with which he saluted the pirates whenever they arrived at his port. Another was Benjamin Gunn, who ran a port on the Rio Bungo and served as Robert Louis Stevenson's model for the Ben Gunn of Treasure Island. Yet there was no question of Sierra Leone's becoming a vast pirate hangout like Madagascar. The country was too unhealthy, the pirates and pirate traders too few, the Royal African Company too well established in its fortified posts along the coast. Still, the traders managed a modest business, sending their employees upriver in boats to swap brass pots, pewter pans, old guns and English gin for slaves, ivory and dyewoods, which they sold to English merchantmen who had the courage to defy the Royal African Company by trading with them. It was from these traders that Roberts and his crew learned for the first time of the presence of 2 British men of war on the coast, the Swallow under Captain Challoner Ogle and the Weymouth under Captain Mungo Herdman, both formidable ships of 60 guns each, sent by the Admiralty at the insistence of the Royal African Company as a protection against Roberts and the other pirates still operating in the region. The Navy's ships had left Sierra Leone on patrol a month before the pirates arrived.